It was raining the night my brother changed the locks on my childhood home. Not a soft rain. The kind that soaks through your clothes and makes everything feel heavier. I was standing on the porch where I used to wait for the school bus, holding a cardboard box filled with my mother's photo albums. Marcus didn't even look guilty. He held up a new silver key and said, calmly, almost bored, "Dad left me the house. You don't live here anymore." Behind him, the hallway light glowed warm and familiar. The same hallway where I carried our mother to bed during chemo. The same kitchen where I crushed her pills into applesauce when she couldn't swallow. I blinked at him through the rain. "We haven't even read the will." He smirked. "We don't need to. Sons inherit. That's how this family works." Then he stepped inside and shut the door. The lock clicked. Just like that. My clothes, my memories, my entire childhood, stacked in damp boxes on the lawn. Neighbors peeked through curtains. I stood there, shaking, grieving, homeless. But here's what Marcus didn't know. 8 years earlier, while he was learning how to measure lumber with Dad in the garage, Mom was sitting in a lawyer's office, separating the deed. Because my brother inherited the house, but I inherited the land beneath it. And in exactly 7 days, he was going to find out. To understand what happened that night in the rain, you have to understand the kind of house I grew up in. On the outside, it looked perfect. White colonial, 4 bedrooms, manicured lawn, American flag by the porch. Inside, there were rules. Unspoken, unwritten, but absolute. My father believed in legacy. And in his mind, legacy had a gender. Sons build, he used to say at dinner, pointing his fork toward my older brother Marcus. Daughters support. He didn't shout it. He didn't need to. It was simply how things were. Marcus, 6 years older than me, was groomed from the beginning. Weekends were for father-son projects in the garage, blueprints spread across the workbench, power tools humming. I'd stand in the doorway sometimes, watching them measure wood and talk about future property investments. "Pay attention," Dad would tell Marcus. "One day this will all be yours. Not yours both. Just his." Meanwhile, I learned different skills. How to cook for guests. How to set a table properly. How to smile when relatives asked what I planned to do before settling down. When I said I wanted to study environmental science in college, Dad didn't even look up from his newspaper. "Why waste the tuition?" he muttered. "You'll marry into someone else's name." Marcus absorbed that mindset like oxygen. He walked taller because of it. Spoke louder. Acted entitled to rooms he hadn't earned. By the time he was 25, Dad had already added his name to business accounts. Taught him about property deeds, investment structures, equity splits. I wasn't included in those conversations. Not once. But my mother noticed everything. She rarely challenged Dad publicly. Instead, she'd catch my eye across the table when he dismissed me. A quiet apology in her expression. Some nights, after dishes were done and the house was silent, she'd sit with me on the back steps overlooking her garden. "You're stronger than they know," she once whispered. I thought she meant emotionally. I didn't realize she meant strategically. There were afternoons she'd leave the house dressed nicer than usual. When I asked where she was going, she'd smile. "Just taking care of paperwork." Paperwork. That word would echo in my mind years later. At the time, I assumed she meant insurance forms or tax documents. I never imagined she was asking a lawyer detailed questions about land ownership, about separate deeds, about what happens when property is divided into structure and soil. Dad never questioned her. Why would he? In his world, daughters weren't threats, and wives didn't interfere with inheritance. He thought everything was already decided. Marcus thought the same. But my mother? She was planting something far deeper than the lavender bushes in her garden. And unlike my father's legacy, hers had roots. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday. Stage 3 ovarian cancer. I remember the way the word malignant seemed to drain the color from the room. Dad stood stiff beside her hospital bed, jaw tight, already asking about treatment costs. Marcus checked his phone twice during the consultation. I didn't leave her side. Within a week, I moved back home. Not because anyone asked gently. Because Dad called and said, "Your mother needs someone here." Not "we need someone." Not "I need help." Just someone. And in this house, that someone was always me. I rearranged my life quietly. Put my graduate program on hold. Switched to part-time remote work. Learned medication schedules. Chemo side effects. How to help her sit up without wincing. Nights were the hardest. She would wake up nauseous, trembling, whispering my name in the dark. I'd sit on the edge of her bed, holding her hand until morning. Marcus visited when it was convenient. Quick hugs. Short conversations. Promises to handle the estate stuff later. Dad never said thank you. He treated my presence like a given. Like daughters were built for this. But Mom noticed. She'd squeeze my hand after appointments. "You always show up," she'd whisper. Sometimes, once a month, she asked me to drive her downtown. To a small brick office building. "Insurance updates," she'd say. I'd wait in the car for an hour while she met with someone inside. When she came out, she looked tired, but certain. Like she was putting something into place. I thought she was preparing for the worst. I didn't realize. She was preparing for what would happen after. For a while, it looked like we had won. After months of chemo and radiation, Mom went into remission. The doctors used the word stable. We celebrated quietly. Dinner at home. Dad even opened a bottle of wine. For the first time in 2 years, the house felt light again. Then, 6 weeks later, everything ended on a highway. Dad insisted on driving her to visit my grandmother upstate. A semi-truck drifted across lanes in heavy fog. The police said it was instant. They always say that. I got the call at 5:42 a.m. By noon, I was standing in the same living room where I had bathed my mother and counted her medications, now planning her funeral. The house felt hollow, like it had already started belonging to someone else. The service was 4 days later. Marcus gave a polished eulogy. Talked about Dad's vision. Mentioned Mom briefly. Afterward, while I was still hugging neighbors and thanking people for coming, Marcus pulled me aside near the church doors. "We need to talk about the house," he said. "Not are you okay? Not how are you holding up?" "The house," he repeated. His voice calm. Certain. Dad made it clear. "It's mine." The funeral flowers hadn't even wilted yet, and my brother was already measuring walls. The will reading was scheduled for Thursday at 2 p.m. Harrison and Cole, downtown. An old brick building with polished wood floors and quiet hallways that made every footstep sound louder than it should. Marcus arrived first. Of course he did. Navy suit. Perfect tie. Rolex gleaming under the conference room lights. Victoria sat beside him scrolling through her phone, whispering something about renovation ideas. I took a seat across the table. No one offered condolences. No one asked how I was doing. This wasn't about grief. This was about assets. Evelyn Cole entered with 2 thick folders in her hands. Calm, precise, unshakable. "Thank you for coming," she said, sitting at the head of the mahogany table. "Today we will be reviewing both Robert Mercer's will and Linda Mercer's will." Marcus leaned back confidently. "There's no need to complicate this," he said lightly. Dad was very clear. Evelyn didn't react. She opened the first folder. Last will and testament of Robert Allen Mercer. The legal language filled the room. Executor appointments, debt instructions, standard provisions. Marcus nodded along like he'd already memorized it. Then came the distribution. "To my son, Marcus Robert Mercer, I leave 70% of my personal assets, including my vehicle, business tools, and my interest in the family residence." Marcus' jaw tightened in satisfaction. Victoria smiled. Evelyn continued. "To my daughter, Brianna Mercer, I leave 30% of remaining liquid assets." Marcus exhaled slowly, almost relieved. "There it is," he said, glancing at me. "Fair enough. Fair. 30% of what would likely shrink after taxes and expenses. The house. The property. The symbol of everything. All his." Victoria leaned toward him and whispered, "Told you." For a moment, the room felt exactly the way it had my entire life. Decided. Finished. Predetermined. Marcus straightened his cuffs. "Well," he said casually, "I think that settles it." Evelyn closed the first folder. Then she placed her hand on the second one. Her voice didn't change. "We are not finished." The air shifted. Marcus frowned. "What do you mean?" Evelyn opened the second folder slowly. "We now move to the last will and testament of Linda Mercer." And for the first time since we'd entered that room, my brother stopped smiling. The room felt smaller when Evelyn opened my mother's will. Marcus tried to laugh it off. "Mom didn't own anything separately," he said. "Everything was joint." Evelyn didn't look at him. Not everything, she replied calmly. She adjusted her glasses and began reading. 8 years ago, Linda Mercer established a separate land trust under Connecticut property law. Marcus blinked. A what? A land trust, Evelyn repeated. Filed, recorded, and notarized. The deed to the land beneath the Mercer residence was legally transferred into that trust. Victoria lowered her phone slowly. Marcus leaned forward. That doesn't make sense. Dad owned the house. Yes, Evelyn said. Your father owned the structure. She paused. But the land beneath it has belonged to Linda Mercer for the past 8 years. Silence. The kind that presses against your ears. Marcus laughed again, but it sounded thinner this time. Fine. So what? Mom's assets get divided. That doesn't change anything. Evelyn finally looked up. In her will, Linda Mercer leaves 100% of the land trust to her daughter, Brianna Mercer. The words landed softly. But they hit like a detonation. Marcus froze. Victoria's face went pale. That's not possible, Marcus said sharply. You can't separate land from the house. You can, Evelyn replied. And she did. She slid a copy of the recorded deed across the table. Signed. Stamped. 8 years old. Under state law, Evelyn continued, any permanent structure built on land owned by another party requires either a lease agreement, purchase of the land, or relocation. Marcus stared at her. Relocation? Yes, she said evenly. You own the physical structure. Brianna owns the ground it stands on. The room was dead quiet. Victoria whispered, what does that mean? Evelyn folded her hands. It means, Mr. Mercer, that your continued occupancy of that property now requires your sister's consent. Marcus turned toward me slowly. His confidence was gone. And for the first time in our lives, he wasn't standing on solid ground. Because the house was his. But the land was mine. Marcus pushed back from the table so hard his chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. This is ridiculous, he snapped. This has to be some kind of mistake. Evelyn didn't flinch. There is no mistake. The deed was recorded 8 years ago. Your mother renewed the trust annually. It is airtight. Victoria grabbed Marcus's arm. What does this mean for us? He ignored her. This is my house, he said, pointing at me now. Dad promised it to me. And he left you the structure, Evelyn replied calmly. But the property taxes, land use rights, and occupancy are now subject to Ms. Mercer's discretion. Ms. Mercer. Not Brianna. Not daughter. Not burden. For the first time in that room, I wasn't secondary. Marcus looked at me like he didn't recognize me. You're not going to actually do this, he said, his voice lowering. You wouldn't. Wouldn't what? Use the law? Stand where he had shoved me out? Grandma cleared her throat softly beside me. Your mother was a very thoughtful woman, she said. She believed in fairness. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, panic starting to show. You can't afford to fight me, he tried again. Lawyers cost money. Evelyn slid another document forward. The trust includes provisions for legal defense fees. His face drained of color. Victoria whispered, almost desperately, Marcus, we just renovated the kitchen. Yes, they had. With granite counters and imported tile. Built on land that wasn't theirs. Marcus swallowed hard. So, what do you want? He asked finally. Not angrily. Not confidently. But carefully. And for the first time in my life, he was negotiating from below. I stood slowly. Not shaking. Not angry. Just steady. I never wanted the house, I said quietly. I just wanted to be treated like I belonged in it. Marcus didn't speak. For once, he had nothing rehearsed. I slid a single sheet of paper across the table. A lease agreement. Clean. Simple. Legal. Market rate, I added calmly. Due on the 1st of every month. Victoria stared at it. Marcus stared at me. 8 years of planning. One signature. And suddenly, the ground beneath his feet wasn't his anymore.